You are looking at the most powerful substance in human history. Wars were fought over it. Empires collapsed without it. Soldiers were literally paid with it. That is exactly where the modern word salary comes from. The Latin word salarium. Salt money. And right now, as you watch this video, a handful of secret corporations and one communist government control almost every single grain of it on the planet. This is the invisible, $38 billion empire behind your salt shaker. Let us go back, way back, before refrigerators, before chemicals, before modern roads. Salt was the only thing standing between civilization and starvation. It preserved meat. It preserved fish. It kept armies fed through the brutal winter. In ancient Rome, salt was so valuable that entire trade routes were built around it. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, ran straight into Rome. Whoever controlled that road controlled the city's survival. In ancient China, emperors did not just tax salt, they monopolized it entirely. Producing or selling salt without imperial permission was punishable by death. Not prison, death. And it was not just China. In medieval France, there was a notorious tax called the gabelle, a salt tax so brutally enforced that peasants were forced to buy a minimum amount of state salt every year, whether they needed it or not. The rich were exempt. The poor were not. That tax lasted over 300 years, and when the French Revolution finally came, when people stormed the Bastille and changed the world, historians point to the gabelle as one of the primary triggers. A salt tax started a revolution. Fast forward to 1930. India. British colonial rule. The British Empire had done what every empire before it had done: monopolized salt. Indians were forbidden from collecting or selling their own salt. They had to buy it from the British at British prices, with a heavy British tax on top. Mahatma Gandhi had been looking for a symbol, something simple, something every single Indian could understand regardless of caste, religion, or education. He chose salt. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea. Thousands of people joined him along the way. When he arrived at the coast, he reached down and picked up a handful of salt from the beach. That single act of defiance broke British law, and it broke the British Empire's grip on India. The Salt March is considered one of the most effective acts of civil disobedience in history. It triggered mass arrests, international outrage, and ultimately accelerated India's path to independence. Salt did not just feed empires, it ended them. But here is what nobody tells you. The salt in your kitchen? It is almost completely irrelevant to the global industry. Over 55% of the world's salt never touches food. It does not go in your pasta, your bread, or your restaurant meal. It goes straight into chemical plants, into winter roads, into water treatment facilities, into plastics, detergents, paper, and pharmaceuticals. Think about that for a second. The thing sitting in a shaker on your dining table, the thing humans have fought bloody wars over for thousands of years, its biggest use today is melting ice on highways and making plastic bottles. The salt industry is not a food business. It is a chemical empire that also happens to sell you a tiny shaker for your table. And that chemical empire is controlled by very few hands. In the United States alone, just 4 companies control 45% of all municipal de-icing contracts. One supply chain disruption, one bad winter, or one factory shutdown can instantly halt over $60 billion worth of production across chemicals, agriculture, and construction, all because of salt. So who are these companies? Cargill. You probably know the name from your grocery store. But Cargill is not a food company. It is one of the largest privately held corporations on Earth, with $177 billion in annual revenue. Their salt division operates 17 massive production sites across North America, supplying over 15 million metric tons per year. Their de-icing segment alone controls 25% of the entire U.S. snowbelt market. Then there is K plus SAG, a German giant headquartered in Kassel. They produce over 30 million metric tons of salt annually across Europe and North America. They also own Morton Salt, yes, the famous little girl with the umbrella, which they acquired for $3.2 billion. Next is INEOS, a European chemical conglomerate so large, yet most people have never heard of it. They extract salt through deep underground mining across Europe, feeding it directly into petrochemical and pharmaceutical production. And then there is the one that makes all of these giants look small. China National Salt Industry Corporation, state-owned, government-controlled, with 48,000 employees and over $7 billion in assets. It is the direct descendant of the imperial salt monopoly that has controlled China's salt supply for over 1,000 years. The dynasty changed, the monopoly did not. Now let us talk about you, the consumer, and the most elegant scam in the grocery store. Walk down any supermarket aisle and count the salt options. Regular table salt, sea salt, Himalayan pink salt, Celtic gray salt, black lava salt, smoked salt. Prices range from 50 cents to $15 for what is, chemically speaking, an almost identical product. Here is the truth. Himalayan pink salt comes from a single mine in Pakistan, the Kura salt mine. It gets its pink color from trace amounts of iron oxide, rust essentially, and the ancient sea it supposedly preserves, that sea evaporated 600 million years ago. Sea salt, harvested from evaporated ocean water, sounds pristine and natural, but a 2018 study found microplastics in 90% of sea salt brands tested worldwide. Meanwhile, regular table salt, the cheapest option on the shelf, is sodium chloride, purified to 99.9% purity with added iodine. That iodine prevents a terrible thyroid disease called goiter, which used to be an epidemic before iodized salt was introduced in the 1920s. The cheap salt might literally be your healthiest option, but pink salt sells for 30 times the price. Why? Because it looks beautiful in a ceramic bowl on your kitchen counter. The salt industry does not just control supply, it controls perception. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. Salt is not infinite. The world produces roughly 300 million metric tons of salt per year. Most of it comes from rock salt mines, ancient deposits left behind by evaporated seas hundreds of millions of years ago. Those deposits do not replenish, not on any timeline that matters to humans. Yet, demand is accelerating. The global salt market is projected to grow from $38 billion today to over $61 billion by 2034. Driven not by food, but by industrial demand, chemical manufacturing, battery technology, water desalination. Climate change adds another layer. As winters become less predictable, the demand for de-icing salt swings wildly, creating supply shocks that cascade through entire economies. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization recommends adults consume less than 5 grams of salt per day. The global average? 9 to 12 grams, nearly double the safe limit. The health cost of that overconsumption, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, runs into hundreds of billions of dollars annually in healthcare spending. The industry profits from selling you a substance your doctor is begging you to consume less of. Sound familiar? Next time you reach for the salt shaker, remember what you are actually holding. You are holding the end product of a $38 billion global supply chain, controlled by a few private corporations and one communist government. Built on thousands of years of monopoly, taxation, revolution, and war. Refined down to white crystals, packaged in a cardboard tube or a pink, Instagram-worthy jar, and sold to you for almost nothing. Because the real money was never in the shaker. It was always behind the barcode. Next week, you brush your teeth with it every morning. You have never questioned it. But the toothpaste industry is a $50 billion empire built on a problem that might not even exist. See you then.